Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open the floor to members of the public who've requested to speak to the committee in accordance with the published Federal Register notice. Before we begin, I'm going to ask the public to be respectful of time and the manner of presentation, noting that at any time, if the discussion becomes disruptive or inappropriate or beyond the time limit, we will need to ask the speaker to cease communication. I also ask all of our members of the public to please turn their cameras off. If you're not speaking, please disable your cameras. Mr. Schwell, if I could ask you, sir, to please you turn your camera off. There, thank you, sir. We will. I will call on you individually. You will have time to please introduce yourself to the committee, and you'll have 2 minutes, and that's in order to allow everyone sufficient time to speak. We will provide you a 30-second warning in the Teams chat when your time is getting near. 30-second warning will be on the lower left of the screen if you have your Teams chat open. I'm going to apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of any names. And so we're going to begin with Velope Boykin.
Let me just remind you that this is being recorded, just as the subcommittee was recorded and available for public viewing. Just to make sure that you all are aware of that. Thank you.
Velope Boykin. What's that? Not on. Stuart Schindler.
Yes. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Can't hear you yet.
Stuart, you're muted.
Oh, am I muted? Are you able to see me?
Sir, you're still muted, sir.
It doesn't look like I'm on mute.
He's
Try it
coming
again.
across on.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Is
Hello?
your
Hello?
Make sure your phone line is open.
Matt, can you try playing
committee.
through your computer? Or is that
Yeah,
not possible?
I'm on my computer audio.
Sir, your time hasn't started, sir. We're trying to see how
okay.
why we can't hear you. You can just
Okay,
hold one moment.
sure, thank you. Hello, can you hear me now?
Sir, can you try to introduce yourself again?
Yes, can you hear me? My name is Stuart Schindler.
Sorry, sir, just 1 second.
By
Sure,
somebody else,
okay.
just to make sure it's not a whole system down.
Well, they say they can hear him online.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes.
Let me take a 5-minute break while he tries to figure this out. Okay. So I'm going to ask the public to be patient with us for, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to have our IT team help us out here.
Great, thank you.
Patrick, can you call down the, thank you. Matt, I'll call in and. This worked so well the other day.
He was our number 2, saying
Test, test. Test,
Hello?
test, you can hear.
I can hear you guys.
Test, test.
I could hear you.
My apologies for that, and thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Stuart Schimler. I am speaking here today against the removal of Moses Ezekiel's New South Monument. I do not speak on behalf of descendants of Union veterans or Confederate veterans, as I am neither. I do speak on behalf of honest Americans who don't like to see American veterans disgraced or our history erased. One of my fellow New Jerseyans, George McClellan, stated on September 8th, 1864, quote, "The Union was originally formed by the exercise of a spirit of conciliation and compromise. To restore and preserve it, the same spirit must prevail in our councils and in the hearts of our people," end quote. I believe what the Naming Commission has done is they've gone outside of their remit and defined every asset in the DoD inventory that supports reconciliation as, quote, honoring the CSA, which is what the mandate is by law. Therefore, I don't believe this monument should be removed, and removing it would be illegal. I'd also like to point out that on McClellan's Gate, which was the old entrance to Arlington National Cemetery, there's a poem that says, "Rest on embalmed sainted dead, dear as the blood ye gave, no impious footsteps here shall tread on the heritage of your grave." And the truth is that removing this monument would harm Moses Ezekiel's grave, and it's against the spirit of Arlington. I'll close just by saying that that poem on McClellan's Gate was written by Theodore O'Hara, himself a Confederate veteran. What else are we going to destroy? Thank you very much for listening to my comments today, and I hope you'll do the right thing.
Mr. Schimler, we had a little, you came up a little bit broken, but if you could stay on the line, I'm going to go to the next speaker and to see if the audio is better, so that we'll come back to you if that's all right, if you have a few minutes to stay with us.
That is okay, and I will stay. Thank you very much.
So next is Philip Lee.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, but I think other people have more compelling comments than I do, so I'll pass that on to them.
We can't go to the bed of this shit. Yeah. So everybody can view. I think they're all mute. I don't think that's the issue. Go to people.
Mr. Lee, we're sorry, we're still having technical difficulties here.
So can you,
You got those mics on. Can you turn? Yeah. Then we need to just say, mute them.
You might want to ride it up a mic too.
Yeah.
can you hear me at all? I can't hear you.
Okay, sir, can we ask you to start again, Mr. Lee? Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak, but I think other people have more compelling comments than me, so I'm going to turn it over to the next person. Did you hear me?
Not fair to them. If this fix you reschedule.
Mr. Lee, you want to, did you say you wanted to not go ahead, not continue?
Yeah, I'm going to let other people that have better prepared comments go ahead.
Second. I'm gonna try it with my phone, but I don't know if we're gonna be able to hear it from my phone.
It'd be better than what we had. It's not a bad idea.
Mute us, please, Mike. Please mute us.
Mr. Lee, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah, if you would go ahead and restart again, that would be great.
Okay. I think other people have better prepared comments than I do, so I'm going to turn it over to the next person. Do you hear that?
Good, thank you.
Everybody hear this okay? All right. Mr. Schwell, can I ask you please to turn your camera off, sir? Our next speaker will be Alan Parker. No, nothing heard. We're going to go back to Mr. Stuart Schimler. I'd ask you to speak again.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Perfect, great, well, thank you. My name is Stuart Schimler. I'm from New Jersey. I'm speaking here today not on behalf of Confederate veterans or Union veterans, as I don't have any in my family, but I speak for all honest Americans that are displeased by the disrespect shown to American veterans by the removal of Moses Ezekiel's New South Monument in Arlington National Cemetery. On September 8th, 1864, one of my fellow New Jerseyans, George McClellan, stated, quote, "The Union was originally formed by the exercise of a spirit of conciliation and compromise. To restore and preserve it, the same spirit must prevail in our councils and in the hearts of our people," end quote. The Naming Commission has gone outside of its remit by defining a monument to reconciliation as one that honors the CSA. This is wrong historically, and it is outside of their remit. I encourage the commission to reject their recommendation and to preserve this monument. Even Union vets spoke at the dedication in 1914 and spoke about the monument as one to self-sacrifice and devotion. Where and when did it become something that means something different? On McClellan's Gate, the entryway to Arlington National Cemetery, there's a poem. And on it, it says, "Rest on embalmed and sainted dead, dear as the blood ye gave. No impious footsteps here shall tread on the herbage of your grave." Moving this monument actually desecrates the grave of Moses Ezekiel. It cannot be done under the law, and it cannot be done with any sense of morality. And one last thing, Theodore O'Hara, who wrote that poem on McClellan's Gate, is himself a Confederate veteran. Thank you very much for listening to my comments, and I hope you do the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Schimler.
Mr. Donald Smith. Mr. Donald Smith. Mr. David McAllister.
Hello?
Good afternoon. Can you hear
Good
me?
afternoon, sir.
Yes, I
Yes.
can.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is David McAllister. I'm with the Friends of the Judah P. Benjamin Camp of the SCD. Judah P.
Oh, how
Benjamin
nice.
was a Jewish senator from Louisiana and invited to
Yes,
be the
and
first Jewish nominee
first
to the
devout
United
Jew.
States
Mr.
Supreme
McAllister,
Court.
I'm going to ask you to wait 1 second. Can I ask everyone who's not speaking, who's not Mr. McAllister, to please mute your mics? All right, sir, go ahead.
Thank you. I was saying that Judah P. Benjamin was a Jewish senator from Louisiana, and he was invited to be the first Jewish nominee to the United States Supreme Court. His fellow religionist was Sir Moses Ezekiel, the creator of the memorial and whose headstone it is. Sir Moses is the most famous Jewish sculptor of the period. To destroy his masterpiece of art is vandalism, anti-Semitic, basically cultural vandalism that's woke and CRT and PC and cancel culture reminiscent of ISIS and Taliban and the projects of the Nazis and communists. It's not the American way. It's derived from an illegal, unconstitutional bill in Congress that violates the prohibition on bills of attainder and flies in the face of the approval and support of Presidents McKinley and Roosevelt, Taft and Wilson, and its inception as a reconciliation memorial. It's recognition by every president up to Obama and Trump sending commemorative wreaths on Memorial Days at this focal point. So please, in the light of all this, please send an advisory decision that the monument not be removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. McAllister.
Next is Mary Stevens. Sure, let the record show that Mr. Mark Farley had to depart for the day. Next, we have H.K. Edgerton.
Mr. Edgerton is at the VA hospital. He's getting treatment, so he's unable to appear.
Thank you, sir. Linnell Siegel. Yes, ma'am.
The number you have reached is not in service. This is a
Thank you very much for your comments.
So next we have Mr. Jack Schwell. Mr. Schwell, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak with your committee today. I first want to say that, as others have already noted, we do not want you to remove the Ezekiel monument. I know you're just a committee that gives recommendations, but we would ask that you recommend the monument not be removed because the order is extra legal and the monument is a grave marker which is outside the remit. I was at the looking on your website there, and I assume it's on all your written materials where the words at the top are honor, remember, and explore. I cannot speak to explore, but I actually have been. I have been to Arlington. But the word remember I spoke about last week, where I said that when the monument is removed, I believe the memory is removed, and I don't think that's part of the duties, or at least not the ones that are written on your website, etc. I'd like to talk today about honor. Honor, a noun which means to adhere to what is right or to a conventional standard of conduct. Integrity, morality, righteousness, nobility, and virtue are words that are synonyms for honor. As a verb, it means to regard with great respect, to admire, appreciate, revere, and venerate. I wonder today if the federal government feels that they need to honor the pledge made to the wives, mothers, and daughters of the soldiers who are buried here. These women at the time were very skeptical about giving up their husbands, their fathers, their sons to the federal government because they didn't trust the federal government at the time, but they did it. And so my final statement would be that if you remove the monument, you will have shown that they were right, and that the federal government cannot be trusted to honor Southern dead, a verb, to honor your commitment to the mothers, daughters, and wives, another verb, and then you have no honor as a committee, a noun. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next, we'll have Lieutenant Colonel John Coffindaffer. Mr. Coffindaffer? Kirk Lyons?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we
sir.
can.
This is Lieutenant Colonel Coffindaffer. Can you hear me now?
Mr. Coffindaffer, why don't you hold, and we've got Mr. Lyons already ready to speak, and we'll come.
Thank you,
back
sir.
to
For
you
some
momentarily.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak. I was set up to speak at the November meeting and was not allowed to speak. I spoke at the subcommittee and I speak here today. I'm coming from a sick bed to talk to you, to talk about this Orwellian thing that of taking down the reconciliation memorials from Moses Ezekiel. It smacks of anti-Semitism and cultural genocide, which the International Military Tribunal prosecuted at Nuremberg. This is absolutely something that cannot be done with the people's art. It belongs to we the people, not to the Secretary of Defense, not to the Army. The Secretary of Defense and the Army are stewards, and they need to be good stewards. I first saw the Confederate Reconciliation Monument in 1969 when my World War II veteran career Air Force officer father was taking the family to his last posting at Hanscom Field in Massachusetts. And we stopped in DC and he took all of us kids, I have 3 siblings, to the Reconciliation Monument and said, "This is the family monument." And we didn't know what he meant by that. But he said, my mother's dad had 3 brothers that never came back from the war. They all died on far-flung fields or hospitals, and they did not get, as far as he knew, they did not get Christian burial. And so to him and to his family, this monument was their headstone, was their cenotaph, was their memorial. And I think it is a crime against art, a crime against the American people for that monument to come down. It was put up in perpetuity, and there it should remain. And you have the duty and the responsibility and the power to advise, as your committee's recommendation, that this monument not be taken down, that it stay right where it is, where that was intended in 1914 when it was dedicated by President Woodrow Wilson. Thank you very much for your service, and thank you for allowing me the time.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lyons, and thank you for coming back at both subcommittee and today. As you know, nobody, we were really in an information briefing in the first meeting and not appropriate for public comment to invite public comment at that time. We're doing that at this point. Thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel Coffindaffer, you're back on.
Hi, this is Lieutenant Colonel Coffindaffer. Com check, please.
Loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Lieutenant Colonel John T. Coffindaffer, United States Air Force, retired, serving as a combat air rescue pilot, 21 years active duty, 14 countries, 4 wars, 2 major offensives, and one of nearly 100 million Americans that have ancestors that served in the Confederacy. I got to applaud you all today, the Arlington Advisory Committee, on the commitment to establish a public affairs office specifically dedicated to the Moses Ezekiel Reconciliation Memorial situation. It's respectfully requested that this new PA office be established and publicized post haste, please. Various publications and websites state that throughout the military branches, 44% of recruits come from the South. That means a recruit from the South has more than double the chance of randomly meeting a Southerner than a resident from, say, New England. In short, the U.S. military is not representative of the country. As we all know, there's never one specific cause for any given situation. I can't help but wonder the Southern enlistment impact upon the current military recruitment deficit due to the naming commissions and DoD's woke agenda and the removal of Confederate American officer heroes' names from our Southern military bases and other assets, especially in regards to the cultural, moral, and legal battle to retain the Reconciliation Memorial. That same memorial that President Woodrow Wilson dedicated as an emblem of a reunited people, end quote. Knowing the outright attack on the Southern heritage, are young Southerners now actually welcome in the military? I can tell you this with certainty. Online readings show many Southern parents and grandparents are not encouraging their children and or grandchildren to enlist. The DoD official policy to openly, unlawfully discriminate against Southern heritage must stop here and now by continuing to preserve the Reconciliation Memorial, the Moses Ezekiel grave, and the nearly 500 Confederate American graves surrounding it. Are we not all Americans? Thank you very much.
Sir, you have 30 seconds. Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we have Garrett Sapp.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make a statement today. I'm from Mississippi most recently, but I've lived all over this great country. Born in California, went to high school in Connecticut and to college in Washington State. I also proudly served in the United States Navy. There are 3 reasons you must stop the destruction of the Confederate Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery. The first is it is the right thing to do. It is right to let those who decided to erect the monument a century ago to continue to be heard. It is the height of arrogance in my mind to think we know better than the Union veterans who attended the unveiling. Who are we to say 4 different presidents of the United States were wrong? One of them was a Union veteran. It is right to let their efforts at reconciliation be a beacon for today and the future. That was number 1. The second reason to save the Ezekiel Monument to reconciliation is that the calls for its destruction are political, even in the military. General Mark Milley is on record calling Southerners who fought for the Confederates traitors. He did this while testifying before Congress. You can respectfully check the record. The vice chair of the naming commission, Ty Sedgley, called Confederate traitors in a celebratory tweet announcing the completion of the naming commission's reports traitors. You may agree Confederate leaders were traitors, but that view is as political now as it was when Thaddeus Stevens and other Republicans in Congress said so in the 1860s. No Confederate was even tried for treason. That was number 2. Number 3 is that you have an opportunity to turn the tide, to say enough is enough. Confederates are really low-hanging fruit. Think about it. We are contemplating destroying a memorial in a cemetery. General Eisenhower led a segregated military. Now there's a fort named after him. You look at the Navy Times and other publications, there's talk now about changing the USS Stennis's name because Stennis was a segregationist. Please end the madness. It is the right thing to do. The calls for the destruction are political. Your courage is required to turn the tide. I made this statement in honor of my father, who is buried at Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sapp.
Thank you, sir. Next is Martin O'Toole.
Call check.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Great. My name is Martin O'Toole. I'm talking to you from Georgia, and we'll emphasize again some of the same things said by some of the other speakers, but the idea that this is a horrible artistic atrocity, it's a historical atrocity, but I wanted to turn to the idea of reconciliation and point out that 10 United States presidents appointed former Confederates as Supreme Court justices, secretaries of the United States Navy, attorneys general, and one Secretary of the Interior. Dozens of ex-Confederates were called upon to represent the reunited nations as ambassadors and consuls all around the globe. Perhaps most tellingly, 8 men who donned the gray in the War for Southern Independence wore federal blue during the war with Spain in 1898. In fact, General Joe Wheeler, under whom one of my ancestors served, was the commander of the Rough Riders and later President Theodore Roosevelt. Former rebels were elected mayors of cities such as Los Angeles, California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ogden, Utah, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Ex-Confederates were governors of states and territories of Colorado, West Virginia, Missouri, Utah, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Alaska, and the Panama Canal Zone. This is what was extended to them when the nation was reunited and reconciled. The people today, the politicians today, are turning their back on this for the attitude of the Americans who lived during that time period was they were happy to rejoin the South to the nation and enjoy the common patrimony of their heroism and courage in the battlefield. To tear this reconciliation monument down today is an artistic atrocity, as I said before. It is probably illegal, as some of the other people have said, and it's something that you as the advisory committee should advise. I listened to the early part of the message when they were talking about it was uncertain whether or not you had the authority to do anything like this. But I did notice when it came to discussing whether former presidents or vice presidents should be buried in Arlington, the note was made that it was the recommendation of a former Secretary of the Army. Well, we've had changes in government as well since this law was passed. We have a new House of Representatives. Perhaps you should make an advice to them to see whether or not they want to continue to fund any kind of such woke political activity instead of historical preservation. So once again, thank you for your service. I hope you'll advise the Congress and the President that this is an act which would be an abomination and a blot on the Department of Defense, on the Department of the Army, and take the National Cemetery and make it a regional cemetery. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toole.
Next, we have Ross Miracle. Ross Miracle. Edwin Kennedy.
Combo check, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My name is Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy. I am a retired Army infantry officer and a professional military historian. I have 29 years in uniform, having enlisted during Vietnam. I taught the graduate core curriculum, Civil War history, and Civil War electives at the Army's Command and General Staff College on active duty, then as a retiree. I retired after 19 years on the faculty. I'm the descendant of numerous veterans, including Confederate Americans buried in Virginia. Other than Colonel Torrance, I believe I'm the only other Army 5 X-ray school qualified military historian involved here. The primary purpose of my talk is a request that you advise the Secretary of the Army that the Naming Commission has not complied with the law. Therefore, its recommendations, which are not binding and relating to the Confederate Memorial, cannot be legally implemented. The Memorial New South should not be illegally destroyed or removed, and the Secretary should so be advised. Destroying cemetery and memorials violates the law and our published military doctrine. It's un-American. It's gross hypocrisy. The remit of the naming commission was not to give carte blanche license to erase grave memorials and markers in cemeteries. Laws passed by the representatives of the people should not be undone by an unelected bureaucracy. The naming commission has intentionally failed to consider the opinions of others outside their extremely biased historical interpretations. I taught counterinsurgency tactics to our officers going to Iraq and Afghanistan 2004 to 2011. It's totally ironic that we taught them that our doctrine emphasized respect for others' cultures. It intended to make the return to peace easier. We're violating those same norms when dealing with our own countrymen and their culture by destroying their mementos, monuments, and memorials to their ancestors. Advisory committees advise. My ancestors and my culture are important. Please advise the Secretary of the Army to stop this hate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Kennedy.
Next, we have Tharn Walker. Tharn Walker. Terry Kilma.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
My name is Terry Klima, and I am a proud descendant and member of the Maryland Division Sons of Confederate Veterans. The proposal to remove the monument violates all standards of decency and brings shame on all those who support such a despicable and un-American action. It is most disheartening to hear West Point professors and senior military leaders parrot the false narrative that Confederates were traitors, as no Confederate was ever tried and convicted. Even the attempt of the U.S. government to convict Confederate President Jefferson Davis of treason proved futile, despite Davis's demand for a trial. The remarks of Chief Supreme Court Justice Salmon P. Chase are most insightful. Quote, "If you bring these leaders to trial, it will condemn the North. For by the Constitution, succession is not rebellion. Jefferson Davis's capture was a mistake. His trial will be a greater one. We cannot convict him of treason." Close quote. Note also the long-established tradition of Southerners serving in this country's military, dating back to the country's founding. To this day, the South provides a far greater proportion of our new military recruits than any other regions of the country. Following the war between the states, Confederate officers Matthew Butler, Fitzhugh Lee, Thomas Rosser, and Joseph Wheeler once again came to the aid of the reunited country in the Spanish-American War, accepting commissions as General of United States troops. Successive generations of Confederate descendants continue to distinguish themselves in the U.S. military and public office, including Generals George Patton, Nathan Bedford Forrest, Chesty Puller, Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., and John Archer Lejeune. U.S. President Harry S. Truman, himself a distinguished and decorated veteran of World War I, a Confederate descendant, and a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, most noteworthy accomplishment was his issuance of Executive Order 9981, prohibiting discriminatory practices and ending the segregation which existed in the United States military since 1862. The Naming Commission's proposal to dishonor Moses Ezekiel and the Confederate interned veterans is barbaric and must not be allowed. Thank you. Out.
Thank you, Mr. Clayman.
Mike Hill. Mike Hill. Bert Jones.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. And secondly, I'd like to thank you for your service to our country. And I really, truly believe you will do the right thing. I have been listening to the comments. I don't feel that I could add anything to the excellent comments that have been made so far. So I'll relinquish the rest of my time to somebody else. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Jones.
Marshall Hester. Marshall Hester. J. David Bennett. Mr. Bennett? John Kelly.
Hi, this is Lieutenant Colonel Coffindaffer. Just real quick, those of you that are on the phone, just push *6. That was my fault that I did not do that. Thank you.
Put that in the chat. Go on the phone, *6 to unmute. Honorable Reverend Dr. Stanley Lotta. Mr. Lotta. Ernest Blevins. Robert Hodge.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Robert Lee Hodge. I'm from Ohio. I encourage that the commission issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the memorial because the order to do so is illegal, as it is a grave marker to veteran Moses Ezekiel. I've been to hundreds of historic sites since I was 4 years old, museums, battlefields, and monuments. The monuments and the people that visit them are passive. The academic and media-fueled argument that these sculptures are magnets of so-called white supremacy are simply false narratives. I've always had high regard for the United States military. My ancestors have fought in all America's wars dating back to our revolution. My father was a combat veteran in World War II with the 1st Cavalry Division. His ancestors were poor farmers that volunteered to defend the South as they saw it. The highest ranking American casualty in World War II was Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. His father was a Confederate general. I always thought it was liberal in the classic sense that the United States let former Confederate states put up monuments to their fallen in the economically deprived South. It was the women that led the efforts to remember their fathers, their brothers, and their sons. This was done heavily around the 50th anniversary of the Civil War, when northern towns were putting up monuments to their dead as well. The Jim Crow argument is simply false. Some believe efforts to remove monuments to Southern soldiers is a form of ethnic cleansing. Some feel there is nothing liberal about the effort to remove this monument, but totalitarian and authoritarian based on emerging cultural Marxism. Based on what is happening, I have empathy with those thoughts. More than 90 million Americans are related to Confederate soldiers. I hope you can see these actions undermine confidence in the United States being truly liberal. I thought the Civil War was over. The presentism of today is dangerous. And where does it go? We must remember that the states that wished to leave wanted to do just that, not to overthrow the government, just to leave it. The precedent that the removal of the monument would set is dangerous, as all other cemeteries where monuments to Southerners exist will be on the chopping block. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge.
Next of John Goddard.
Yes. Last week at the, let me just lead off and introduce myself. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. Last week at the subcommittee meeting, I described why I support preserving this monument, being a veteran and a native of Richmond, where Ezekiel was born, and having a great-grandfather who likely knew Moses at that time. I have a personal connection with it. But more importantly, there is something broadly shared by most people in every place and in every time, and that is this. You don't break your word and pretend that this act is anything other than dishonorable. The Congress and President promised this portion of the cemetery and its monument to these veterans in the early 20th century. It was a gesture of reconciliation, but it was also an act of trust. And that trust has been and is a responsibility of each generation to carry forward to the next generation. Removal of the monument breaks that promise made many years ago. It demonstrates a faithlessness to the duty required of this government to keep its promises and care for these veterans buried there. A failure that comes from a willful blindness to truth, responsibility, and honor. As a veteran, I would compare this act to running away from your comrade in his time of need. It is unwise, it is unjust, it is a stain on this government and this generation that is complicit in this despicable act. When the states declared their independence from the king, the founders distinguished between those who served the court of the king and those who served their country. To this committee, you can either serve the court of rulers or serve your country. Do not break the bonds of trust made to your countrymen, living and dead. Be faithful to them and keep this monument where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goddard.
Next, we have Valerie Protopopoulos. Valerie Protopopoulos. Mr. Gene Kaiser. Sir, we can see you. We cannot hear you, sir.
You can see me, but you can't hear
We can
me?
hear you now, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Okay. My name is Gene Kaiser. I'm historian and publisher in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you all for your service to our country. The Confederate Reconciliation Memorial must stay right where it is forever. The Naming Commission erred when it said the Confederate Memorial was within its remit. It is not. The Confederate Memorial does not commemorate the Confederacy as required by the NDAA for the Naming Commission to have any say. It commemorates the reunification of North and South. Presidents McKinley, Taft, Wilson, and veterans North and South were actively involved. The 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg was the year before, with the famous handshakes across the wall by the old Union and Confederate gentlemen. Art critic Michael Patterson states that no sculptor has ever in any one memorial told as much history as has Ezekiel in his memorial at Arlington. And every human figure in it, as well as every symbol, is a work of art. To destroy that magnificent 109-year-old monument surrounded by 500 graves in concentric circles would be a crime so evil and immoral it would put the American federal government on the same level with the Taliban. But worse, it would dishonor Arlington National Cemetery for all time. Arlington National Cemetery would be associated with filthy politics and no longer be the sacred burial ground for all Americans. The reconciliation theme is clear and irrefutable. In Arlington National Cemetery's application to be on the National Register of Historic Places, it states over and over, like in Section 7, there were changing sentiments between North and South with the authorization by Congress of a Confederate section within ANC. The reconciliation that began with this monument would be further strengthened through the Arlington Memorial Bridge. President Eisenhower kept a picture of Robert E. Lee on his wall in the White House the whole time he was president. Somebody wrote to him one time and asked why he had Robert E. Lee on the wall, and President Eisenhower wrote back and said, respecting your August 1st inquiry, calling my attention to my often expressed admiration for General Robert E. Lee, I would say first that we need to understand that at the time of the war between the states, the issue of secession had remained unresolved for more than 70 years. Men of probity, character, public standing, and unquestioned loyalty, both North and South, had disagreed over this issue as a matter of principle from the day our Constitution was adopted. General Robert E. Lee was, in my estimation, one of the supremely gifted men produced by our nation. He believed unswervingly in the constitutional validity of his cause until 1865 was still an arguable question in America. He was a poised and inspiring leader, true to the high respect reposed in him by millions of his fellow citizens. He was thoughtful yet demanding of his officers and men, forbearing with captured enemies, but ingenious, unrelenting, and courageous in battle, and never disheartened by reverse or obstacle.
Mr. Kaiser, you're running into your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Distinguished committee, please stand with President Eisenhower and leave the memorial where it is forever.
Thank you for your comments, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Walter Kroptovich.
Give me a second here.
Sure, sir.
All right. So, all right. So, hello again. My name's Walter Kroptovich. I am an Army veteran that was retired from injuries from the Iraq War. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had spoke on 2 occasions, once on both subcommittees. First off, thank you for all the information. I was not aware of all those logistical resources for the honors funerals. It was very enlightening. I would ask that this committee kind of look into maybe longer term. It is clear that we do not have the resources to keep up the demand as is for some of these higher honor funerals. And I know you already restricted it once. Maybe it's time we need to look at a more restrictive system on it. I've kind of changed my tune after hearing about all the resource issues. It might be worth taking a look into and seeing if it might relieve the backlog. On the second thing, on this memorial, I'm have to say we should not be deleting history or erasing history. And by starting to touch monuments here, how soon before we start removing Mount Vernon from the list of everything? I mean, how far do we go? But those are kind of my comments. But like I said, I did speak yesterday, and you have a copy of my letter and my comments from yesterday's meeting on that part.
Thank you for your comments on both of the issues. Appreciate it. You found the briefing enlightening. It's a significant resource challenge for sure. Thank you.
Next, we have Al Arnold. Al Arnold. Wade Alfred. Mr. Alfred. Mr. Eric Lambeth. Sir, we can't hear you, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. I am an honorably discharged U.S. Army veteran. I am married to a beautiful and amazing African-American woman with whom I share a daughter. And I, like my daughter, am a descendant of Confederate soldiers. Regarding the Confederate Memorial, I am candidly appalled that we are even entertaining the possibility of desecrating a memorial to fallen American soldiers in our most sacred national cemetery. I do grant you, in recent years, the Confederate American soldier has become politically incorrect to remember and to honor. But I ask you, should the remembrance of the sacrifice of American soldiers be subject to the prevailing political winds on any given day? I also remind you, there have been other politically unpopular wars in our history. The Vietnam War was unpopular nearly from the start. The Iraq War is now regarded by many as a mistake. If we set this precedent with respect to the Civil War, we should not be surprised if future generations clamor to tear down the Vietnam Memorial Wall or remove the graves of Iraq War veterans, citing racism or imperialism or capitalism or what have you. Perhaps future American soldiers not yet born will one day have their memorials officially torn down by the United States government over political arguments that we have yet to imagine. So I implore you, do not set this horrific precedent. Do not surrender to the whims of the moment. Stand tall and do the right thing. Allow dead American soldiers to rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. We have one.
We have one ad, William Gant.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As a young boy, my father took me to Washington, D.C. I remember going to Arlington and seeing the Reconciliation Monument. I was in awe at its beauty and meaning. I love being from the South, but more than that, I love being an American. I care about its past, present, and future. I'm afraid that once this president is set, all things in America would be in danger in the name of political correctness. 100 years from now, how will our people view the war in Iraq or Afghanistan? Will they say we were wrong to invade and occupy inferior nations to force them into political system that they did not want? My son will be of military age soon, and we plan for him to enlist. However, why would I permit my son to fight for a government who thinks his grandfathers were evil and unworthy of remembrance? I will not permit it. Considering our military's current troubling enlistment problems, I think it would only make things terribly worse. The removal of this monument would be on par with both Bolshevikism and an atrocity within itself. I respect y'all, and I hope y'all do the right thing. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Mr. Lambert.
This is
Mr. Lee, you
Rabbi
have your
Wisniak.
hand
Am I on
raised.
the
Is that
list
it?
of speakers? Hello, this is Rabbi Wisniak. Am I on the list of speakers?
No, do you care to speak?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought I was on the list. I've been waiting patiently for an hour.
Sir, can you restate your name, sir, clearly?
Sure. Rabbi Eric Wisnia, Wisnia. I am a
Go ahead,
retired
sir.
rabbi
We
of
don't have you.
Congregation Beth Chaim. Okay. I would like to speak. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to speak in defense of the monument that Sir Moses Ezekiel made. It is not there to condescend or rewrite history, but rather those who are trying to remove it are trying to rewrite history by destroying a monument to reconciliation. Are we so convinced that everything related to the Confederacy or Confederates is evil, that Sir Moses' depiction on his monument of two African Americans amid Confederate soldiers, that although it's accurate historically, that it has to be objectionable? Are we willing to join those racists who will not even admit that it is possible that this monument to those who served the Confederacy actually proclaims that there were African Americans who helped the Confederacy? Sir Moses Ezekiel stated that he wished to be buried at the Southern Soldiers Monument at Arlington. Eventually, he was laid to rest in the Confederate Circle. His grave is at the eastern foot of his sculpture, with a small bronze plaque on a granite pedestal without the traditional approved Veterans Administration white marble headstone. His sculpture, The New South, stands as his headstone at the top of his grave. I find it sad that some people today need to condemn Sir Moses and call for the removal of his Arlington monument. I reject racism and bigotry, yet I am proud to honor him as a great Jewish American sculptor. To me, his statue stands as a work of art and a memorial to Southern soldiers in a Confederate cemetery. I ask all my fellow Americans, can we not let the dead lie in peace? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Mr. Lay, you have your hand raised. Is that intentional or?
Yes, it is. If permitted, I'd like to make a brief comment.
Go ahead, please.
During my lifetime, I've observed that I think that patriotism during my lifetime has always been reflexively more supported in the South than elsewhere. So I did do some research prior to this meeting, and I discovered that from September of 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland, to December 1941, 70% of Americans wanted the United States to do something to rescue England. In the South, it was 90%, notwithstanding that the rest of the country wrecked the South during the Civil War. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let's run down the list of those that we may have been on and didn't respond.
Mr. Boykin? Mr. Boykin? Mr. Parker? Alan Parker? Donald Smith? Mary Stevens? Ross Miracle? Theron Walker? Mike Hill? Marshall Hester? Mr. Bennett? Ernest Blevins? Valerie Protopis? Al Arnold? Wade Alfred? Just to confirm, Mr. Davis, Mr. Lotta, Mr. Kelly both declined, correct? Yeah.
Is there anybody on the line who would like to request to speak? Go ahead, John.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Lieutenant Colonel John Zeppelin. I did not sign up, but I would like to have a few thoughts.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I request that this body issue an advisory on the reconciliation monument to the United States Army, emphatically opposing the removal of that monument. Increasingly, fewer young people have any inclination to serve. The renaming of military bases, as well as this monument and other Confederate monuments to Confederate officers, along with the removal of these and other monuments to American veterans, is hampering recruiting as willingly dangerous. Think Ukraine and the growing China threat. Now you must ask, how does any of this negatively impact recruiting? As already pointed out, the American South supplies roughly 44% of all military recruits, plus around 8 in 10 of those who have close family members who have worn the uniform. A 2021 poll found fewer military families would now recommend service to these young American members. Service in the military is largely a tradition. Sons and daughters, nephews and nieces join because their fathers, grandfathers, or uncles joined. I was in the military for 25 years, fought in 2 wars. I joined because members of my family have been in this country's war since the American Revolution. In recent times, I and others veterans have watched public officials sacrimoniously tear down veteran memorials. Yet, by and large, these same individuals are the same ones who never so much as stood in the chow line, much less heard a shot fired in anger. Does any member of this committee seriously entertain the notion that those of us who are now veterans would willingly recommend service to the young people in this today's woke military? I don't think so. Removal of the Reconciliation Monument would be an abomination. And I thank you for your time. Good afternoon.
Can we get your name, please? Because we
Sure, I'll spell it again.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel John, last name is Zeppelin, spelled Zebelean, United States Air Force, retired.
Sir, could I ask Mr. Coleman to put that in the chat of his teams so that we make sure we copy your name correctly, sir? The mic comes in broken at times.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir.
Is there any other requests to speak with the
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Where'd you bring that up?
So. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Mr. McAllister. All right. I think we want to go back to our regular channel then. Turn that off. You can put it back on. Then you take it on view. Okay. So let me first thank all of you who made comments today. We appreciate the chance to hear from all of you. I'd like to open the floor now to the committee for discussion on this issue. We've heard from our Remember subcommittee earlier today, and this is what we've heard mostly this afternoon is a continuation of the discussion on that topic. And I think it'd be worth making sure we understand legally where the naming commission reports to and the Secretary of Defense's his decision to where we stand with that.
Would you like me to take that, or can I?
Why don't you start and then I'll fill.
So, Mr. Bull, correct me where I err. How's that sound? The naming commission completed its work. It was a congressionally mandated commission, supported by the Department of Defense, completed its work and submitted its report to Congress.
The report went to Congress, right?
That's correct, sir. Went to Congress.
When did that happen?
That was September of this past year, so September 2022. 60 days later, it was the Secretary of Defense had to wait before he could take any actions or respond to that report. He acknowledged and accepted all of the recommendations, and then it was directed the Undersecretary, Mr. Lapata, directed implementation of those recommendations on 5 January. That's correct, sir. By memo. So directed all the services to implement the recommendations of the naming commission as they were in the reports. And we've provided the link to you before, but we can provide it again so you can read the reports if you want to read them personally.
Could I ask, were there other monuments directed to be taken down in other national cemeteries, or is this the only monument?
So remember, and some of the individuals spoke about the remit of the naming commission was for the Department of Defense.
Right.
So it was Department of Defense assets that commemorated the Confederacy, or those that
voluntarily served the Confederacy.
Those that voluntarily serve the Confederacy. Thank you, Justin.
And the Department of Defense only operates 2 national cemeteries.
I'm getting there, Justin. Yeah. So The only monument on a national cemetery is the Confederate Memorial here at Arlington National Cemetery that's in the sphere of the Department of Defense.
Specifically, what did the naming commission say about that Confederate monument? Did it to be removed?
Yes, sir. The specific language was, if you give me 2 seconds, I actually have what we briefed at the last meeting here somewhere in my notes, unless Matt can bring it up relatively quickly. I've got it right here. So they said that the statue atop the monument should be removed. All bronze elements on the monument should be deconstructed and removed, preferably leaving the granite base and foundation in place to minimize risk of inadvertent disturbances of the graves. That the work should be planned and coordinated with the Commission of Fine Arts and the Virginia State Historic Preservation Office to determine the best way to proceed with the memorial's removal. In their planning, the Department of the Army should consider the most cost-effective method of removal and disposal of the memorial's bronze elements. And that the naming commission recommended the Secretary of Defense authorize directors of all defense entities to rename it. So it's not necessarily important there. So it has to do with 2 roads that were named in Arlington that needed to be renamed.
On the screen.
In the best. Thank you.
Renee, might I ask when the naming commission visited Arlington?
Yes.
I would imagine that someone escorted them out to see the monument. And they got to walk around the monument and look at it and get a feel for it.
That's correct, ma'am.
You, our historian, whose name escapes me.
Dr. Carney.
Dr. Carney, mentioned that they had, prior to the naming commission, they had a plan to use, to take the monument and have a teaching moment with it, to kind of bring it into the 21st century and provide opportunities for discussion.
Contextual, we had already started a contextualization and basically an interpretation of the site, the greater section in the site. Yes.
Was that presented to, did Dr. Carney have an opportunity or someone have an opportunity? Okay, so the naming commission got to hear what Arlington had planned prior to the naming commission's existence.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And their decision was, no, it's better that the monument be removed rather than to use it as a learning opportunity.
Correct.
Interpret. There seems to be some feeling amongst some of the callers that there was some prior feeling among the naming commission that, whether it be one member or several members, that they were very anti-Confederate. There was a member who had written a book called Robert E. Lee and Me.
That's correct.
I don't know who the member was, and I don't know anything about the book. But there was some feeling among some of the callers that prior to even visiting, that some of the members of the commission were anti-Confederate and anti-Confederate monument. So I've made up my mind before I even see what this thing is, and I don't, whatever you're going to present to me, I think it should go. Did you all feel that you had a good opportunity when they visited to make the case for, or to show what we felt we could do with the monument? Or did you all feel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did they come with an open mind? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask.
So I can't speak for the members of that commission.
No, but I mean,
but
I feel like we got to make a good.
I personally made several presentations with support of the staff to the naming commission through their work. And so we had an opportunity to discuss grave markers. They received some of the briefings that this very committee has received in the past to understand the context of what they would see throughout the cemetery. And when they were here on the grounds, they also visited several markers, one of which is, Major General Walker, who served not only in the Confederacy, but also went on in the Spanish-American War. They visited Arlington House and the particular section at Arlington House that commemorates Robert E. Lee. because that's National Park Service property, as a reminder. And then we spent quite a bit of time at the memorial itself, and they engaged with the historians. You know, I think everybody has preconceived notions or opinions. I don't know specifically all of theirs, but the individual that keeps being spoken of was rather vocal about his position. He did not come to the cemetery. He was not here that day, so.
Okay. But Arlington had a chance to make whatever
I believe
presentation.
we've, yes.
Okay, you may not know the answer.
Who's good?
Do you happen to know if there are any monuments that are on the VA property that might be scheduled for removal?
No, because remember, this is just the DOD naming committee. They don't like, it's not the DOD naming commission. Was the naming commission for Department of Defense assets. So they did not even look at National Park Service or VA.
Sure, VA is doing its own review, but that's good to know. Thank you. Check.
No. Could I follow up on Ann's line of questioning? I would like to know more about the naming commission process on the Arlington recommendation. Did they take a day? Is there a record that they looked at the review of what the meaning of the monument was considered to be when a president of the United States came and dedicated it? Or was that considered and then overweighed by their beliefs about the monument?
They were provided the full history by the cemetery of all the actions leading up to context of that period of time in general, because as this committee, we've talked a lot about those types of markers in those types of monuments in the cemetery. For example, it's when the Spanish American War Monument, the Argonne Cross, the Nurses Memorial. So there's quite a few that in that era, that turn of the century, all that information.
Or not, or considered it or not.
They were brief, sir.
Is there any transcript or record of their discussions about this issue?
Sir, they were not, they were not an open naming, they were not a federal advisory committee. They were a congressionally mandated committee, and so much of their work, the deliberative work was not open.
So
even the cemetery.
So we don't necessarily know at all their rationale and reasoning.
Other than what's in the report, sir.
Because what troubles me about that, one way to conclude is the decision's been made. We're an advisory committee. It's beyond us. On the other hand, we were created by Congress, be an independent voice, to try to oversee the iconic nature of Arlington Cemetery. And if without the renaming commission's work, this committee were to consider this issue, I have to believe we'd spend a year or two reviewing it, studying it. It would be a significant issue no matter where people ultimately came down. And so not having knowledge of how seriously the naming commission took into account the very unique nature of Arlington versus renaming Fort Hood, Texas, which I would say the privilege of representing, that it's a different, this is a unique, iconic place. And did they take that into account or not?
We tried to convey through the iconic nature and history here.
There's no record of their discussion, no videotape of any public meeting they had. This was just in effect, a closed door decision by how many people were on the naming?
Sir, I have to look again. I think it was
9 or 10.
9. I think it was an odd number. I don't think it
And
was.
yet the same thing, I don't have the same insight to it, but the same emotion. When we're talking about emotional places in our nation, is occurring with West Point and maybe occurring with Annapolis. Although I don't put the same two on the same level, but there were I don't mean it. I don't mean level of school. That didn't come out. That did not come out. Strike that from the record. Strike that. Some of us.
The new Civil War.
Strike that from the record. But so many of the Confederate generals are associated with West Point, and there are buildings named for them and portraits named for them, and this, and this, and they went very specifically. This will come down, and that will be renamed, and this will change. And there I'm continuously amazed, and you may see this, sir, at what graduates are willing to put their name to online, and the language they use about how spineless and other parts of the anatomy are missing from people that are running the academies, that they're going to allow these changes to happen. That it is, and West Point is also an iconic American institution. And the same thing happens, how much time did they take? What did they have to, how did they consider, the culture of what this iconic institution means to the United States? Well, I don't know. And nothing is published. It's just, this is going to go and this is going to change and this is going to go, blah, blah, blah. The problem is, I think in this instance, this monument represents to many people, not just the Confederacy or a Confederate personality, i.e. Robert E. Lee, but this represents reconciliation to a lot of people. And they think, or maybe more to Southerners than it does to the Union. And reconciliation, why would you attack something that at the time was seen as a good thing? There's a whole walkway at West Point that's around the turn of the century. They were trying to get graduates who were trying to get together and let's shake hands and be friends. But this represents to a lot of people that it was the nation coming back together. And why would you attack? Why would you deconstruct that? So I think that to a lot of people is anti what we're trying to do, is be together as a nation. Is it correct that at the time it was dedicated, did President Wilson's remarks speak of reconciliation in that?
Sure.
Isn't that correct?
we can have the historian speak to us again on kind of that event, date, time. I can't tell you exactly what his words were because I don't recall.
The sculptor is exquisite, and you see it, you can't believe it, you walk around it, just for its aesthetic, it's extraordinary. And like all great works of art, I think it's open for interpretation. I think I could stand.
Oh, yeah,
shoulder
I can
to
see.
shoulder with someone also very short, but I could stand shoulder to shoulder with someone and we could see it differently. So I'd like to just wrap that a little bit in my remarks, is that art, it can be interpreted. I think I want to go where you were going, Chet, and I'm bothered by, I'm not a fan of slow government, but I am a fan of transparency and methodology that is open, and I feel like a decision was made and now it's left to this body to slow a train. And I'm not comfortable with the process based on what I know. And maybe I just need to educate on how we got here. Arlington National Cemetery, it's our nation's Fabergé egg. And we protect this no matter what. The rules apply across, we're rule followers. But there's something about, there's many things about Arlington National Cemetery where it needs a second look. It needs a thoughtful dialogue, and considerable deliberation. And I know this wonderful body, we're taking that on. It sure feels like it should have started before, no disrespect to the committee, and make those decisions.
So I'm guessing that in commissions or had no input from this committee or this committee.
So actually their work, the entirety of their work occurred between the period of this Federal Advisory Committee being active. It was during the zero base review, started just after the zero base review, and then concluded prior to they had a 2-year agreement.
Does that not give us now almost a requirement to raise our voice on this investigating?
So as we discussed at the last meeting, we're entering into the phase of as even their recommendation said, we have to follow the historic properties, all the legal aspects of the historic properties, and the lawyer's back here saying the right words in his head and saying Renee, but for historic preservation. And therefore, we're going to begin the section 106 process where we're going to talk about mitigation and a relocation, a permanent location for the monument. But I can have Justin, sir, if you'd like.
Let me just make a comment here, because I think the 106 process is well-defined.
It'll be public.
And we got nothing to do with it. So, that it is a process that goes on, and it is based on what the Secretary of Defense has already has decided. Different for us. We can advise however we want as a committee. I think it's worth being clear that there are how many legal objections to this now in the courts?
Two litigations.
There are 2 pending lawsuits, correct?
Okay. So, and we have no idea how that's gonna roll or when they're gonna get done, right? So, I think the other question I had to get clear is if there's clarity about, because a lot of this is about what the remit is, and it's the naming commission really has nothing. It's congressionally mandated and therefore it has congressional oversight, right, Chad? I mean, so, how that operated is outside the purview of anything other than our observation that it was maybe a lack of transparency, but I don't know the details of that. But I'm sorry. I think in terms of the Secretary of Defense, did he have, according to the law, did he have the option of accepting or rejecting different pieces of the naming commission?
With that, I'm going to ask for phone a friend if I can ask the attorney to clarify some points that have been discussed. Mr. Buller, if you'll come up here so the mic picks you up well.
Good afternoon. So to answer some of these questions in some context, it is the Department of Defense's position that this was, you notice we keep saying Congressional Naming Commission. This was Congress's action. They directed this. This was an action by that branch of the government. It was not an executive branch action. And so ultimately it was their decision. They did not have, and step back and answer a question I'm specifically asking a legal point from you earlier. When Congress acts, there is a presumption that Congress is well aware of what laws exist on the books. So while there is a Title 10 responsibility for this committee to exist, Congress could have specifically required the naming commission to obtain input from this commission. They did not. And so the commission simply had the authority to act. They came up with their report. The Secretary of Defense accepted that report. Ultimately, though, it was Congress who had the ability to override this. They had a 90-day window from when the Secretary of Defense accepted the report to take action to stop anything that they disagreed with within the report from the naming commission.
With a simple majority or with a supermajority in the Senate? Would it require 60 votes in the Senate or a simple majority?
It would be my take that it would have required a simple majority to take action on this. Now, I am not an expert on Senate parliamentary action, which it seems like you need an entire law firm to sort out those rules.
Yeah.
And so I will be very cautious to speak with any authority on exactly how the maneuvering would have happened in the Senate on that. I don't think that's really within the scope of what I can speak to for you, sir. But on the face, it would appear a simple majority could have voted such that, but of course, there's the very interesting filibuster rules in the Senate and the like that could have certainly played a role here. Nonetheless, the fact was no action was taken by the Congress to stop the report. And so then at that point, we had no choice in the Department of Defense but to move forward with implementing the decision that was ultimately a congressional decision, because they created this structure And then they took no action to undo what was done by their commission. And so that is the position.
So you're saying that the Secretary of Defense had no authority to reject any of the recommendations?
I don't see any such authority for him there, and I'm not going to go into, great detail on what this.
It matters because of what we're advising. We can't advise him to do something that is not within his remit. That's what I'm trying to understand from a legal perspective, if in fact he had discretion or does not have discretion.
Well, he had 60 days.
No,
90, yes, 90.
Yeah, 90 days. I mean, we're past all of that
Yeah.
window. I think is the really important point, Mr. Chairman, is that back in that window, I think he could have gone back to the commission and say, hey, I disagree with these findings, and then let the commission take action on what his disagreements were. He made no such statement or rebuttal, if you will, to that he accepted it. It went back to that 90-day waiting period. Congress took no action. So that 90-day waiting period expired in December, I think I want to say it was December 21st.
15th or so, something like that.
It was late December, right before Christmas. And that window expired. So I think to your point, Dr. Peake, and please tell me if I'm still missing or what you need here. To your point, the window of opportunity for this advisory committee to provide feedback to the Secretary of Defense, Congress, or anybody else on this was really in that window from when the report was made public to when the 90-day waiting period expired.
But we were not really reconstituted.
You had just reconstituted in November was that first inaugural meeting.
Let me ask this. Technically, the Secretary of Defense could tear down the monument tomorrow, or I guess he has to follow the Section 106 process. But is there anything in the law that has an end date by which it would have to be torn down? Or is it an open time frame for him?
And if I could first, before he answers that question, sir, it doesn't say it has to be torn down. So that's why I want to make sure that we make sure we keep that in mind. It has to be removed from Arlington National Cemetery.
It has to be removed. Is there any deadline on when that action must be taken?
January of 2024 is what the law, as it was written, said the actions had to be implemented by. However, if we're complying, and now I'm going to lean on the lawyer again, if we're complying with another law that maybe takes us longer than that, we will just go back and say we're not going to meet the timeline.
The reason I asked that, we could use the fact that the Secretary of Defense couldn't single this naming commission recommendation out from others. But couldn't we also use the fact that Congress created this body as an independent advisory group? And as an independent advisory group, we have the authority to say, if we want to give advice to the Secretary of Defense, we can. If he wants to listen to it, he can. If he wants to ignore it, he can also. And if we have that authority, I guess the question to the group would be, do we feel a sense of obligation for Arlington that we would want to know that this was really thought through carefully, even knowing the Secretary of Defense could, move ahead with implementation even before we came to some sort of, is there anything in the law that keeps this independent advisory committee from looking at an issue that we think might be important to Arlington's future?
I think it'd be putting the Secretary of the Army in a very awkward position to make a recommendation that, they restudy it or whatever. I think that would be political suicide to say it, maybe for you.
Sir, all I can speak, of course, is the legal, not the political ramifications, sir. What I would suggest is, very respectfully, Congress was, that's my reference saying there's a presumption that Congress is aware of laws on the books at the time they pass a law. So the fact that Congress did not explicitly include you as an entity that had to be consulted as part of this process by their naming commission, it is assumed they were aware of that, and so they did not require your input in this process.
But they haven't done anything to prohibit it from now forward if we want.
Sure, I think for clarity, by the charter, this committee can render recommendations as you deem appropriate, and memorials are called out as one of your remits. So you can offer recommendations at any time to the Secretary of the Army. They're just that, recommendations.
Without precluding any recommendations, for example, one option would be to invite several members of the naming commission to come meet with us and just share with us. We have responsibility to help oversee Arlington. We'd like to learn more about what process they went through, what they thought through, to what extent they considered. At the time, I believe the president talked about this being a symbol of reconciliation. I don't think that was just made up by those who testified today. That we'd have the right to ask naming commission members to come. We couldn't force them to come, but we had the right to. Again, Tom, without concluding, we're going to make a recommendation to the secretary. Just listen, just learn more about what went through their decision-making process. Is there anything that would prohibit us from doing that?
They are private citizens now, or one's still a federal, not federal, excuse me, one's still I think he's a Senator Scott, or Rep Scott, excuse me. So they would be private citizens, sir, just,
right.
Because that commission has been disbanded, thank you.
So they could come voluntarily and explain their process and their thinking. And here, I'll finish with this because I want to hear from everybody. But I'm a son of the South, and I'm not proud of the South's role in the Civil War. And I don't agree with those who say the Civil War wasn't fought by the South in order to defend slavery. I believe it was. Maybe there were individual soldiers that fought for other reasons. The principles they thought were important, but in my opinion, as a native son of Texas, it was about defending slavery. So I would not agree with some of the testimony given today. I wouldn't oppose. In fact, I would support the renaming of Army installations. I'm surprised, having served on military-related committees, frankly, I had not thought through there were 8 Southern Army installations named after Confederate generals. And I would disagree with some of those who testified today. I think it is a positive thing that we're going to change that. Having said all that, if that monument was dedicated by the President of the United States at a time when our country was trying to reconcile after the Civil War, then I would hope that should be taken into account in whatever final decision is made. And maybe ultimately Congress has to revisit this and to just have it totally removed without consideration of what was this historic meaning. I haven't read all the speeches given that day. I don't, but I do believe reconciliation was one of the, so, and let me say, I'm offended
of the time. Yeah.
I'm personally offended by the Latin quotation that to some degree in effect says the real victors were those who had higher principles. As a son of the South, I'm offended that there were Southerners. I don't believe in the lost cause. I believe the lost cause was people trying to rationalize a war that more than anything by the South was fought over slavery. So just putting all that on the table, I still think there might be room for saying this monument was dedicated by presidents in the name of reconciliation. And before we just say, well, an unnamed committee in unpublic meetings made a decision to do it, maybe we have responsibility to at least learn more about it. And then again, Tom, we may decide we don't want to touch it, or you guys might, the committee might decide not to even hear from the naming commission. I don't know, but anyway.
I think this is a different animal than that, and I've never been to this place, but the street in Richmond with all the Confederate generals on rearing horses. I think this is a different entity than that, and I can understand why we might want to change some of what we adulate. And so I think it's worth looking at again. Now, how we do that, I can see what Tom says. If the Secretary of the Army had an opportunity to look at this, and Secretary of Defense had an opportunity to look at it, and they both looked at it and said, okay, fine with me, and passed it. And now it's in the process of being enacted. We have to be very careful about how we go back and say, now, wait a minute, Mr. Secretary, Miss Secretary, and, Mr. Secretary of Defense, we think you ought to look at this again. We got to be very careful about how we do that. I think it's worth doing because I think there are a lot more people than the 30 or 40 people who contacted us who are unhappy about it, who would be unhappy about this if they knew about it and studied it. So I think it's worth our time thinking about doing it. I just think we have to do it very carefully.
So I will say, as I've mentioned several times, we're beginning a more public part of the process. Yeah. So, as we begin and as we finalize, I should say, we've already begun starting what is called our consultation plan. This body is on that consultation plan. So, we will be including, ANC will be including this body as we look at the mitigation and the relocation of the monument
Which
to
is
help
different than
guide.
the issue at hand. So we could comment on the mitigation and if we get asked to, then I think we will. I do have a couple of questions. In terms of, we've heard this thing referred to multiple different times. Is there an official title to the memorial? It's not the
Memorial. It is the Confederate.
Confederate Memorial.
It is written in the
It's not
context
the
of reconciliation.
reconciliation memorial. It's not.
No.
So just for the record, I'd like to, let's get that clear that this is and when you look at the remit of the naming commission, it talks about monuments to the Confederates. So that's the name of it.
Matt pulled it up for me the last time during I just want to.
The other, I think that is, we'd like to be
Reconciliation.
clarity on is there's this allegation that this is actually the headstone of a grave.
It is not, sir.
It is not. And I think
No grave will be touched.
and there's separate headstone for Moses Ezekiel, as somebody mentioned.
He is
It's
a private marker. It's why it's not like the others.
But
It is a private marker. Yes, sir.
So which is different than that. So in terms of the
So this is our what I'm just showing.
National Register of Historic Places.
This is page 7, section 7, page 25.
The Confederate Memorial, number 36 on sketch map, whatever.
Okay. It shows the sketch map. It does talk about reconciliation.
Right.
And it's reconciliation, and it lists those two things. This is in the context of the environs surrounding the memorial and why it's there. This is what's actually in the Federal Register. So it's the actual memorial is the asset. It is its environs or the area surrounding it, and the reason it's there is related to reconciliation.
Could you share with us, if not today, just send us the remarks made by
I'll have our
president
historians.
when
Yes,
he-
yes, sir.
Was it President Wilson that was present?
President Wilson. Yeah.
And they mentioned other presidents. What was the role of the other presidents mentioned?
Taft, I think, is the one. Okay, who got me
Roosevelt.
first? Taft is the one that authorized them to raise the funds.
Finley.
Or maybe it was McKinley that authorized to raise funds. We'll find that out, sir. But there was there were a series of events, if you recall. The first of which was the law that brought all the consolidated the Confederate graves. It had them bring them all. Some came from Alexandria, Mount Manasseh, brought them all to one section. Then there was authorizations for them to raise money and place a monument. And then there was the making of the monument, which didn't have anything to do with the federal government. But then there was the commemoration or the dedication of the monument. So it was a series of different players. So I'll get the real facts and we'll provide that to the committees.
Well, I guess, Jim, the first question would be, in terms of next steps, we could either, as a group, as a committee, decide this is it, we don't want to get any more information on this, or we could decide without coming to any conclusion about any action we recommend or whether we'd ever recommend action. Do we want to continue to get some information, possibly learn more about this process and how did the decision get made? Is that?
I should have suggested, could we get the congressional committee to give us an audience? I might have missed something because of the last thing, but do we know who makes up or who the politicians are on that commission?
The names of the members of the Congressional Naming Commission are public record, absolutely. And with the exception of the one congressman, they are all private citizens. Of course, the one congressman is a sitting U.S. congressman at this time.
And many of them are retired military.
Many of them are retired military. That is correct. I'm absolutely certain. And so, just to put a very fine legal point on this, the Secretary of the Army didn't make a decision here. She wasn't empowered with authority to make this decision. The decision was made by the Naming Commission. And just reiterating DOD's legal position on this, that the Congressional Naming Commission made the decision. Secretary of the Army did not make the decision. And the opportunity for that to change has passed as of the end of December, whatever the exact date, and I apologize. Like I said, it was 18th. Okay, so as of 19 December, when Congress failed to take any action, and barring any future action from Congress, we, meaning DOD, are obligated by law to move forward and do what the Naming Commission told us to do.
Well, just let me make sure. I just wrote down. Okay, Sec Army they didn't report to Sec Army. It went to Congress because it's a congressionally mandated.
Correct. After the SecDef accepted.
The SecDef got an opportunity to look at the results of the commission. And he did not change anything.
That is correct.
Then it went to the Congress. And they didn't change
it. They made no changes.
Okay. When the SecDef looked at it, prior to the SecDef looking at it, I would imagine the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of the Navy, since they went to both academies, had the opportunity to look at it.
I can't.
You don't know. Okay.
They did it.
All right. But the SecDef, it went to the SecDef. So prior to going to the SecDef, I would think the services got to see it, but you don't know.
I don't.
Okay.
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
And this naming commission can operate outside of the Federal Advisory Council, and
Well, they're a congressional commission.
so it's slightly ironic.
It's different than, because of course, this body is servicing the executive branch versus the Congress.
I'll say my.
Let me.
Chair.
Yeah, please, Chair.
I just have a quick question. Clear of the process. And talks about remediation removal. And our input, this input to that process is only restricted to moving that process forward. In other words, we can't comment. All our remarks have to be
For that,
concert with moving that money.
our advice will be asked about moving that forward. Separately, we can make a independent recommendation to the Secretary of the Army. Provide advice. My thought here is just, I'm curious what you guys think. I mean, my sense is, the sense of the committee is that we prefer the opportunity to have it remain and allow our historians the ability to provide interpretation. Am I missing something from anybody?
That would be.
Is that?
That feels a little bit more forward. I heard if we need more information as to how the decision was made, can we insert more thoughtful information?
That decision is gone. I mean, it seems to me that there is an opportunity, Justin, contrary to what you said, an opportunity, a potential that this could be reversed by the courts. Well, I don't, I'm not, from what I've heard, what I've heard is that that's not likely because it is not a grave, and it is within the remit of the, but I think we could make the point that if the opportunity comes to reverse this decision, we've been briefed by the historians, and we have this committee has the utmost confidence in our ability at Arlington to maintain the iconic nature, to maintain this with an appropriate level of interpretations. Now, I think it's the history of this thing is that it was put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution at a time when there was
Daughters of
Confederation, yeah, wrong war. Sorry. At a time when they were actively reshaping around this lost cause,
Yes.
To reshape, the image of the South, really, So, I mean, you can take that for what it's worth, but that's what the historians briefed us on the last time and what I've read about. So, but that could be provided with historical interpretation. I think if in fact this is not a headstone, we don't want to make that argument. It's not going back and saying that, the naming commission was illegal or as some of the things that we've heard. But saying, look, if there is an opportunity here to have that revisited, we think that it would continue to complement the iconic nature of Arlington. It's 3 million visitors a year with appropriate historical interpretation. And that, I think it also ought to inform us as we get requests for monuments and so forth about the impact of approving those for Arlington and being very careful about not trying to create a political.
Take on a life of their own.
Yeah. So
General Peake.
Yeah.
Do we, as this committee, have any authorization to put in our disagreement, the naming commission, to the commission?
No.
I
mean, we can do it. We can write whatever we want, but the naming commission is gone, doesn't exist anymore. And B, our advice is the Secretary of the Army.
So we've already submitted
not advice to, if somebody said to Congress and the president, we're not providing advice to them.
And this is thinking off the top of my head, but it could be after we gathered more information about how these decisions were made. While the decision's been made, the reason I was asking Justin about a deadline, take care, Tom. Is that there's not I'm sorry, you said January of 2024. Could the Secretary of Defense delay the final implementation of the decisions just to give Congress more time to?
My bet is it ain't going to be done by January 2024, whatever the steps have to be. So.
Yeah.
But I don't think he can do it.
The law does not contain any authority for the Secretary of Defense to extend that.
So it says all actions are to be implemented by January of 2024.
But the court, if it's still in the court,
can't.
Obviously, those would be intervening factors.
Right, that's my point. So I think it's unlikely January 2024, but we can get if that becomes our position, and I have no heartburn about asking for more insight into the decision. I would be surprised if they would come and testify before.
Interested.
We could certainly ask.
If nothing else, I'd like to set a precedent to any degree. Our committee can set a precedent that before Congress or Secretary of Defense or Secretary of the Army go about making that kind of major change that could impact the iconic nature of Arlington and some of its history that is part of its iconic nature, people ought to be more thorough. I don't know how much time the Secretary of Defense, he's got to oversee America's role in a war in Ukraine. Did he spend 15 minutes or 15 hours or 30 minutes reviewing a recommendation from staff? And it may have been told he couldn't impact any of it anyway. And I don't know if there's a way to collect more information. Seems like that's doing no harm. And if this process moves ahead without us, and then it does, but at least we tried to be respectful of Arlington. I mean, I actually believe there's some historic value in showing my grandkids someday the Lost Cause Monument and say, as a Southerner, I think this Lost Cause Monument, the Lost Cause was a wrong cause that I disagree with, that misrepresents what the Civil War is about. So I think there's some value in even not erasing that. But I would love to see what the president's.
Yeah, and I know Jerry's going to talk about this too. I agree that as again, along with suffering recovering journalists, removing an artifact, you're removing the conversation. This course, you're removing the opportunity to teach an important lesson. To be able to point to some of that artwork and say, with the context that they were going to lay out, nothing's going to teach someone more about what happened during that time by the time than being able to look at it, see it. I feel like there's a part of me that feels like trying to take away remnants of history is to lose the opportunity to teach for the future generations.
I think my sentiments are well known about this committee. But I wonder if the David Commission is some strategic thinking to find about second and third order effects of this decision on what it means for our future as a nation. Long-term effects. And I'd be interested to know if that was in their thought process. There was second, third order effects, it's your logic, long-term logic. I think the whole book's strategic, whether they know or not. But they're looking at the second, third order effects of this. And also, my opinion, I think that this committee should not remain silent, impudent in this process. And if we have an opportunity to say something, so we're not just totally discounted in the future, then we should get back that.
That's what I agree with you about that. I think that some of the points that we heard, Mark laid out, in different categories. I think within our minutes, we could certainly characterize some of the concerns of folks. I'd get away from the evil forces and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that taints but the concern about enlistment in the South. I think that what we have heard from the public, and which is how I think in our minutes include things that resonated with the committee about the potential concern for the impact this might have on recruiting, which is clearly a current present issue for the military. The notion that recognizing that so much of the recruiting base has come from the South over the years and continues to do so. I think we put that in there because we've heard testimony to that. I think it's back by back as well. So
would you be comfortable with the theme of reconciliation? The question mark, is this, aside from being the Confederate Memorial, is this historically, was this originally created approved by our presidents, is a symbol of reconciliation?
I think I would be very comfortable with putting that in
If those were the words, the theme of the dedication.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
I would have to say, someone would have to show me a direct quote using that theme. Otherwise, it's sort of interpretation of theme reconciliation.
We'd
have to see what
Mr. Carney had that. Dr. Carney had that last time.
I think there is something, but I could be wrong.
Dr. Carney briefed us on it, actually.
He did.
So we can, but I think we can gather that. We don't need to. I mean, I do think we've got a time, but I wouldn't put it past our next meeting.
No.
But I think, you know, and if I'm happy if we want, if the committee's interested in at least inviting the naming commission, maybe we can get invite the chairman or
There were two,
designate.
there were two co-chairs. There was a chairman and a co-chair.
So we invite them to come and talk to us.
Would everybody be comfortable with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have.
I think Joan Bostic would come.
Would Joan Bostic on that?
Gerald Bostic was, yes.
I think he would come.
Who's the member of Congress that,
Yeah,
who's the member of Congress that was on?
it was, Rep. Scott. Georgia, I think.
Oh, okay.
Georgia.
Rick Scott?
The Admiral Howard, not sure what her first name was the, was the co-chair, and then, Brigadier General Ty Sedgley was,
He's the guy that wrote the book.
that wrote the book. Yes.
Yeah.
But
That
so
somebody quoted.
if you go slide down, I think there's a link. There's several links in here that will link you to other information. Keep going down. Matt.
I would note that on the,
This is our website. If you want to keep going down, Matt, there you go, right there.
I don't think that the Confederate Memorial was an after, was a kind of a throwaway. It is actually on the cover of their report when you pull out the report. So I mean, and there's a significant section in it that discusses some of the things we've talked about. So I don't think this was a casual, unthought through by the naming commission, whether you agree with them or not, but it's
It was said by a president. We also have to take that president into context as well.
well, that
President's word.
but
It was TAP that actually approved the placement. So that's what, so a lot of this is on our website. That's the point I wanted to bring this up so that there's some detailed information. It's really it's helpful to see the greater context. And then I'll provide you the link where you can see the speeches that it's in the archives.
So just to conclude, then, it's my sense, and I'm asking for validation from y'all, that we would like to continue this discussion. That, but we would formalize any recommendation at our next meeting. That we've really appreciated the input from the public that we've had over now 2 different sessions. That we recognize that the 106 process will continue to proceed based on the current decision by the Secretary of, and now that has been back to Congress and approved. But that we're open to providing recommendations about a way forward for the next meeting. That and I think our minutes go to the.
Not all minutes
Not all
go,
minutes.
just only reports. So if
So
you
we
determine this
should
is
be
a report,
prepared to create a report at our next committee meeting. Which leads us to, do I have any objections to that approach?
No, but sir,
Yeah.
no objection, but this is just stating our position as a council.
That's all we can do.
Right. But
We
there's
have
no
no
way,
authority other than to provide advice.
right,
And
and
I
as
think
Jackson said, there's no way we could get our recommendations resubmitted to the council or anything, because that's all complete. The time
We
that
were, yeah, that's correct. And we were never asked.
never asked
The,
for.
the committee didn't exist at that time.
Yeah.
And that's another point to make, I think, is that now reconstituted by act of Congress, and that we feel an obligation to make a comment. And I think we can put that in the report when we do it.
You can make the argument that without the FACA, without this advisory council input, there wasn't public input.
No, no.
Oh, there wasn't public input.
So they chose not to conduct public meetings on the Confederate memorial. That is, they conducted public meetings for at all the bases. That was called out in their, in the law, that they were to engage the communities. But they chose not to do anything in this area.
But
That's amazing.
It is on something of this import. No, I mean, it may be, I don't want to prejudge what our conclusions would be, but one of our conclusions could be in the future, we want to, our committee, our advisory committee believes strongly that any major change at Arlington should be the end product of the public process, transparent public process.
Yeah.
That's a statement.
And that is in fact the basis of our input for this report. Will be basis of our. So with that, do we have our next meeting?
Look at August, sir.
August. Seems like an age away, but.
I'm going to try to do that now, Renee, or do you want us to all send you emails?
So, yeah, we don't do it right now, sir. If we want to, we can try to get a couple.
Of that first week of
August.
Good if we can do it.
Say again, Matt, go ahead.
I can send out emails over some proposed dates. Up to the Zoom shares.
23rd, 24th, I've got a.
Yeah,
that's meeting.
Question, their name.
First week through the 5th, I'm out.
What days are there days that absolutely won't work for folks? That's
what we're looking for.
For me, the 19th to the 21st are blocked.
23rd, 24th, and 1st through 5th are out for me.
And 27th is bad for me. I can make
27th. That's Sunday.
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
Or all those dates in this.
Yeah. I skip that. Oh, I'm gonna. The 20th through the 26th, that may be out of the country.
22, 26.
Yeah.
Take body armor.
Amen. The 16th is not good for me, but earlier in the week is.
I'm hearing kind of before so earlier in August. What's the first 2 weeks in August look like?
So the week of the 7th. Certain days, the week of the 14th. The days usually.
The 7th is a no-go for me, and the 9th I prefer not to, so the next week is actually better. What are their days good for you, better for you? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Anybody have problems with any of those?
Talk about what, August?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in general, but the days of the week, does that matter to anybody in terms of travel, those kinds of things?
I'll work my schedule.
14th and 15th for me.
How's the 14th and 15th of August sound in general?
Works for me. Does that create any problems having to fly in on Sunday for anybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll look at those as a target.
15, 16.
14, 15.
We don't think we should have this earlier than August?
Tell me when you want to meet, sir. We'll see if we can make it as a cemetery, make it happen.
what is that?
This is March.
March.
Try June.
April, May. Yeah. it's-
How many times are we allowed to meet? We're not in,
I meet 4 times a year.
so that'd be quarterly, basically.
Say, man, look in your binder. Matt's
Yeah,
Matt's
that's what it
thinking.
said.
It's 4 times, up to 14. I think it's just.
It's up to 4 times.
Come up with some other dates earlier, and we could send out an email and I'll respond to those.
The end of June, the last week in June, it has, what that look like to people? We run into Christmas vacations, we run into summer vacations, careful. And 26, 27, 28, 29.
We'll be in Scotland.
Say what?
That doesn't, we, we can figure that out.
July is almost all out for me, but June.
We can figure that out.
Last week in June,
Unless I'm with you.
I take a look at that.
Last week of June,
Well, I think
major,
earlier than August. I'd like to see us get together before all of this thing gets
Yeah. that last
back
week.
ahead of us.
Last week of June.
I'm attending a funeral here on the 26th.
Is it here?
It is here.
So we could maybe.
It is here.
Deliver it in.
I'm around that time. They told me we book around the time of funerals.
It's 9:30.
Oh, perfect. 9:30 in the morning. I'll make it.
Let's see, so what subcommittee?
So fit into that funeral frame, what would be the 27th? Maybe.
Where we
So
could
if you're at
do,
a funeral on Monday.
I'm at a funeral on Monday.
we could have a subcommittee in the afternoon and a,
Sure.
and a
Sure.
meeting on the 27th.
I hate to make you work around me, but I gotta go to the funeral.
No, no.
As long as it's not yours.
Yeah.
That's called planning ahead.
There you go. So, without further ado, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I got a motion to adjourn, sir.
Objections? Objections? None? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to the
Thank
public
you.
for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.